What if I told you that in the span of a single night, the very heart of the bloodline stopped beating, not with a thunderous match or a championship loss, but with a single choice? A whisper. A superkick. A betrayal so seismic it didn't just shake the WWE Universe, it shattered the legacy of Roman Reigns. Because on that night, Jey Uso didn't just walk away from the bloodline, he walked into the arms of Seth freaking Rollins. And WWE will never be the same again. The betrayal didn't happen under the bright lights of WrestleMania. It wasn't dressed in pyro or buried beneath chants of "this is awesome." No. It happened in the most painful way betrayal always does, quietly, backstage, in the aftermath of a fight that left the family bruised but still breathing. Until Jey took the breath away. Roman Reigns, the tribal chief, had weathered storms before: Cody Rhodes, Brock Lesnar, even internal tensions from Jimmy and Solo. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for the moment when the one man who once cried for him inside Hell in a Cell would stand across from him and say, not with words, but with action, "I'm done kneeling." The moment arrived like a whisper carried on the wind, undetectable until it was too late. Backstage. Dim lights. The aftermath of another grueling war between Solo Sikoa, Jacob Fatu, and a resistance slowly forming under Seth Rollins' command. Roman had arrived late, weary but assured. He had heard Jey was in the building. He told Heyman, "Let me talk to him alone." There was hope in his voice. Hope that the brotherhood they once shared, the bond built in pain and forged in blood, could still be saved. What he didn't know was that the betrayal had already begun. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't reactionary. It was weeks, months, in the making. Jey Uso had been watching. Waiting. Remembering. He remembered the humiliation of being forced to say "I quit" in front of the world. He remembered the silent moments between matches, the subtle dismissals, the way Roman used love like a leash. And maybe, just maybe, he remembered what it felt like to be his own man. Seth Rollins remembered, too. The visionary. The architect. The man who had built empires only to watch them burn. He had stood beside Roman Reigns once. As a brother. As a shield. And then as a rival. Now? Now he was something more dangerous. A liberator with a vendetta. So when Jey walked into that dim hallway after Raw, Seth Rollins was already waiting. No camera crew. No WWE producer. Just two men, each betrayed by the same tyrant, facing the truth in silence. A nod. A handshake. A whispered phrase. It's time. And the bloodline broke. Within hours, internal WWE systems were already scrambling. Production assistants pulled upcoming bloodline promo footage. Editors recut trailers. Marketing teams were issued an emergency directive: Jey Uso is no longer to be featured with Roman Reigns. A new graphic was leaked. It didn't show Roman. It didn't show Jimmy. It didn't even show Solo. It showed Seth Rollins and Jey Uso. Standing side by side. Rebellion personified. And if you think this is just another turn, just another heel twist or face betrayal, then you haven't been paying attention. This wasn't about wins or losses. It wasn't about gold. It was about freedom. Jey Uso had spent years as Roman's shadow. He bled for the bloodline. Lied for them. Fought for them. And in return? He was controlled. Manipulated. Punished for hesitating. But now, the hesitation was gone. And Roman Reigns? He was blindsided. Backstage reports indicate Roman was devastated. That after the betrayal aired live, the moment Jey delivered a superkick that dropped him to his knees like a broken king, Reigns locked himself in his dressing room for over 2 hours. No Paul Heyman. No Solo. No words. Just silence. And for Roman Reigns, silence has always been his most terrifying weapon. But this time, it was his wound. Sources close to WWE Creative began leaking fragments of what was to come. "We knew Jey had to make a choice," said one anonymous producer. But aligning with Seth? That wasn't just rebellion. That was revolution. And like any revolution, it needed its spark. It came during the final segment of Raw. Roman and Jey were face to face. Roman reached out. Arms open, not for violence, but for forgiveness. A gesture of reconciliation. A move that hinted at repair. Jey leaned in and hugged him. And then? Superkick. The sound rang out like a gunshot. Roman's body crumpled. Paul Heyman screamed. The crowd gasped. Seth Rollins emerged from the shadows, smiling, not in malice, but in vindication. The message was clear. Jey Uso didn't betray Roman Reigns. He freed himself from him. The bloodline, once untouchable, was now bleeding from within. Jimmy Uso, still reeling from past betrayals, was nowhere to be found. Solo Sikoa? Growing more unhinged by the day. And Jacob Fatu? Torn between loyalty and legacy. With Jey's defection, the entire structure crumbled. And backstage? Panic. "We didn't see this coming," one top talent said. "We always thought Jey would break, but not like this." Cody Rhodes, reportedly watching backstage during the betrayal, was overheard saying, "They really went there. They did. And they're not done." Because Seth Rollins isn't just building a team. He's crafting a resistance. The resistance. A new movement. A new doctrine. A rejection of bloodline politics. A redefinition of what family means in WWE. And Jey Uso is its first true defector. The betrayal hit harder than anything WWE had aired in months. Social media lit up like a firestorm. #JeyUso trended worldwide. Fan-made graphics of Jey and Seth flooded Instagram and Twitter. TikToks of the betrayal looped on repeat. People weren't just reacting. They were mourning. Because this wasn't just betrayal. It was the end of an era. And the birth of something darker. More dangerous. More real. Seth Rollins and Jey Uso, once pawns in Roman's kingdom, were now kings of their own cause. And Roman? He was alone. No brothers. No Heyman. No chance of "acknowledge me." Just the cold realization that the bloodline he ruled with iron fists and whispered threats was gone. And the worst part? The betrayal hadn't even peaked yet. Because as Heyman once said, "It's not the knife that kills you, it's the moment you realize who's holding it." The fallout from Jey Uso's betrayal didn't just ripple, it detonated. Like a glass throne suddenly shattered, the bloodline, once the most dominant force in WWE history, was reduced to fractured loyalties, wounded egos, and unanswered questions. And at the center of it all stood a man once loyal to a fault, now reborn in fire. Jey Uso didn't just betray Roman Reigns. He exposed him. The next episode of SmackDown didn't open with music. There were no explosive pyros, no chant-inducing promos. It opened with a camera drifting through a silent backstage locker room. The bloodlines. Empty, the red lei that once symbolized power now lay abandoned on a bench, its petals withering. A half-drunk bottle of water stood on the counter. And most hauntingly, the armband, Roman's symbol of unity, had been ripped and tossed on the floor. WWE wasn't offering commentary. They were showing the funeral. Because this wasn't just the collapse of a faction. It was the burial of a dynasty. Solo Sikoa was the first to speak publicly. Known for his stoicism, the enforcer had never been a man of many words. But this time, his silence wasn't enough. Standing in front of a live crowd, Solo spoke 6 words, and each felt like a bullet. "If you turn on us, we turn on you." It wasn't a threat. It was a law. One etched into the walls of the bloodline since the beginning. Loyalty above all. And betrayal? Unforgivable. But the WWE Universe noticed something even more chilling than Solo's threat. He never said Roman's name. Not once. The word tribal chief wasn't uttered. Not even a glance at the Titantron image of Roman Reigns. For a faction that had always revolved around hierarchy and deference, that silence was deafening. Solo wasn't defending Roman. He was defending the ideology of the bloodline. And in doing so, maybe even distancing himself from the man at the top. Then came Paul Heyman. The wise man. The architect behind the empire. But this time, he looked different. Not just older, but hollow. Like someone who had stared too long at the burning remains of his greatest creation. In a backstage interview with Kayla Braxton, Heyman didn't deliver one of his usual wordy declarations. He didn't shift blame. He didn't posture. He whispered. I warned him, Heyman said, voice trembling. I told Roman, loyalty isn't inherited. It's earned. And he stopped earning it a long time ago. The air changed. Even the camera operator, shaking slightly, seemed stunned. Heyman wasn't defending Roman Reigns anymore. He was preparing for something else. Something new. Speculation swirled, had Paul Heyman finally stepped away from the tribal chief? Was he scouting his next king? Or worse, had he seen this betrayal coming and done nothing? And where was Roman? No video. No statement. No message from the island of relevance. Just silence. And silence in WWE isn't absence. It's a warning. Meanwhile, Raw announced what no one expected to see so soon: Seth Rollins and Jey Uso, live. Together. One ring. One microphone. The world watched with bated breath. And when the night came? The roof came off. Seth walked out first, title slung over his shoulder, clad in black and gold. The visionary. The revolutionary. But this time, the general. Then came Jey. No music. No pyro. Just footsteps echoing down the ramp. The crowd didn't know how to react. They were witnessing something they hadn't seen in years: Jey Uso walking toward the ring without his family. Not as a twin. Not as a cousin. Not as a soldier. As a leader. Seth handed him the mic without a word. Jey looked around. Paused. Then said it. I did what he wouldn't. The eruption was instant. Not from the speakers, but from the people. They felt it. The truth of it. Roman wouldn't change. Wouldn't listen. Wouldn't forgive. So Jey stopped asking. And started taking. Seth leaned in, fire dancing in his voice. You all called him tribal chief. But he never treated Jey like a chief. He treated him like a pawn. Then came the mission. This isn't about burning the bloodline, Seth said. It's about building something better. The crowd held their breath. We're not a faction. We're a movement. A new logo flashed on the screen. An Ouroboros coiled around a broken crown. And underneath it? The resistance begins. This wasn't heel versus face. This wasn't good versus evil. This was control versus freedom. Roman Reigns ruled through fear. Through dominance. Through hierarchy. Seth and Jey? They were preaching liberation. And in that moment, a new war began. Backstage, the locker room buzzed. Cameras caught glimpses of reactions. Jimmy Uso pacing, fists clenched. Jacob Fatu shaking his head in disbelief. Solo? Alone in the corner, seething, silent. And Roman? Still absent. But the message had been sent. Jey Uso had not just walked away. He had declared war. Paul Heyman, always watching, refused to answer questions. When asked directly if he was still with Roman, he simply replied, I serve those who lead. And leadership? Was shifting. social media became a war zone. Hashtag Jey Uso trended for the 5th day in a row. Memes exploded. Fan edits of Seth and Jey in Shield-style gear went viral. One fan wrote, "They didn't just turn heel, they turned history." And the most viral tweet of all? A side-by-side image. Top half, Jey hugging Roman in the ring. Bottom half, Jey super kicking him into the mat. Caption: "Some families break you. Others break free." WWE's creative team scrambled. Internal meetings extended into the early hours. Rumors emerged of a major WrestleMania shakeup. Vince might be gone, but the shadows of his blueprint lingered. And this? This was tearing that blueprint apart. Triple H was reportedly all in on this story. According to one anonymous writer, he told us to stop thinking like producers and start thinking like historians. This is a moment people will remember forever. Because they will. The night Jey Uso stepped out of Roman Reigns' shadow wasn't the end of a feud. It was the start of a revolution. The fallout wasn't just personal, it was political. For the first time in years, WWE creative found itself divided. Not on the storyline, but on its implications. Because Jey Uso, in choosing Seth Rollins, had done something that transcended kayfabe. He hadn't just chosen a rival. He hadn't just picked a side. He had picked freedom over family. And Roman Reigns, once surrounded by power, was now surrounded by silence. That Friday on SmackDown, WWE didn't open with a pyro display or a title match promo. It opened with a single spotlight on an empty chair in the middle of the ring. That chair. The one Roman sat in during his acknowledgements, during his demands, during his rulings as tribal chief, stood unoccupied. The camera slowly panned around it, and on the Titantron, one line flashed: "A king without a court is just a man in a chair." Then the lights cut. Roman still hadn't spoken. No pre-recorded message. No surprise ambush. No cryptic Twitter post. The tribal chief had gone dark. And in his silence, Seth Rollins and Jey Uso spoke louder than ever. The resistance was no longer a whisper. It was a wave. The next Monday on Raw, Seth and Jey opened the show, not as rebels, but as leaders. They didn't come to the ring with swagger. They didn't crack jokes or cut clever promos. They came with purpose. Seth took the mic first. "Look around," he said. "This isn't Roman's kingdom anymore." Then he turned to Jey. "Tell them why." Jey stared into the camera. No smile. No hesitation. "For 3 years, I bled for a man who only saw me as leverage. I wasn't his family. I was his leash." The crowd murmured. "I stayed. I fought. I followed. And when I finally had enough, I didn't just walk away. I chose to stand beside someone who remembers what being a brother really means." The crowd roared. And then the second bombshell dropped. Seth announced that the resistance wasn't just symbolic. It was strategic. A new faction. A new war. And new recruits. That's when the lights flickered. And Sami Zayn's music hit. The crowd erupted. The man who had once infiltrated the bloodline from within, the man who had been betrayed, humiliated, and cast out, now walked down the ramp not as a clown, but as a soldier. He entered the ring, looked at Jey, and for a long moment, said nothing. Then he nodded. Jey nodded back. No handshake. No hug. Just mutual understanding. The crowd began to chant, "RESISTANCE. RESISTANCE." WWE had officially crossed into new territory. Later that night, backstage cameras captured Jimmy Uso watching the segment on a monitor. His face unreadable. One producer approached him for a comment. Jimmy didn't speak. He simply walked away. But the tension in the locker room was mounting. Roman's absence wasn't being seen as power. It was being seen as vulnerability. And in WWE, vulnerability is blood in the water. Reports leaked that Jacob Fatu was frustrated, clamoring for a direct confrontation with Jey. Sources say he confronted Paul Heyman backstage and demanded answers. "What's the plan?" he reportedly growled. "You said we had control." Heyman, for once, had no words. Because there was no plan. Not yet. And then, just when it felt like the resistance was running unchecked, Roman Reigns finally broke the silence. A pre-recorded message aired at the end of SmackDown. No music. Just a black screen that slowly faded into Roman Reigns seated in a dark room. No crown. No title. Just Roman. Real. Raw. And furious. "You forgot," he said, "who made you." He leaned forward. "You forgot the nights I stayed up making sure you were ready. You forgot who kept your name alive when the world moved on. You forgot who gave you main events. Who gave you purpose." His voice dropped. "You think Seth Rollins sees you as an equal? He sees you as a message." A pause. "And when I return, I'm going to deliver one of my own." Cut to black. No date. No location. Just this line: "A king doesn't beg. He hunts." The tension exploded into a fever pitch. WWE officials immediately scheduled a confrontation for the following Raw: Jey Uso vs. Solo Sikoa. One-on-one. No interference. No factions. Just blood against blood. When the match arrived, it wasn't wrestling. It was war. From the moment the bell rang, Solo attacked like a man possessed. Jey didn't back down. The match was brutal: stiff strikes, spears into the corner, suplexes onto exposed floors. But it wasn't the outcome that mattered. It was what happened after. Jey had Solo set up for the USO splash. He climbed the ropes. Looked down. Hesitated. And Solo, beaten but grinning through blood, whispered loud enough for the ringside camera to catch, "Still not your own man." Jey paused. And jumped anyway. 1, 2, 3. Victory. But the words stuck. "Still not your own man." Backstage, Seth approached. "You okay?" Jey nodded. But his eyes said otherwise. Because Solo's words weren't just about the match. They were about legacy. About whether Jey Uso could truly break free, or if he was still defined by Roman Reigns. The following week, Roman returned. Live. Unannounced. The lights dropped during the final segment of Raw. Seth and Jey were in the ring, addressing their movement. Then, boom. Roman's music hit. But it was slower. Duller. Darker. The Titantron showed no highlights. Only shadows. Roman walked out alone. No Solo. No Heyman. No title. He entered the ring, stood face to face with Jey Uso. And said 4 words. "You think you won?" Jey didn't blink. "I know I did." Roman smiled. Not a smirk. A real smile. "You'll regret this." Then he turned his back. And left. No brawl. No chaos. Just a promise. And Roman Reigns has never broken a promise.